This is the end of Yu-Gi-Oh! As we know it. Or is it? 2007 was a big year for Yu-Gi-Oh! For the direction of the game went in would be a noticeably different one than before. So what exactly causes shift midway through the GX era? In this video, we will be looking at the latter half of 2007 Yu-Gi-Oh! In what is known as perfect circle format and see if it truly was the end of classic Yu-Gi-Oh! As I may have proposed. We last left off at Trooper or Troop Dupe format, which was mainly known for the rise of a few decks with the help of new cards. Card Trooper, Elemental Hero Stratos, Gadgets, Advanced Ritual Arts, and Ryza the Storm Monarch. With Monarchs, Machines, and Diamond Dude Turbo representing the format primarily, it was only a matter of time before a new list shook things up, and shaken up they did come September's list. Banned cards are Confiscation, Metamorphosis, Snatch Steal, and Ring of Destruction. Coming off to Limited are Breaker and Faith. Otherwise, key Limited cards are Card Trooper, Disc Commander, Marshmallow before its TCG release, Fissure, and the current SJC price card Gold Sarcophagus, Semide, Malicious, all three Gadgets, Janjo, and Pot of Avarice. Unlimited cards didn't have anything too notable. This is no small list. The idea was to change the meta, which was accomplished. Limiting Card Trooper ended the Troop Dupe Scoop OTK. Not having Metamorphosis hurt the T-Hero strategy. Disc and Malicious also made perfect sense being moved. Plus you had all the power cards getting hit. Ring, Dust Shoot, Snatch, Confiscation, and Megamorph. Gadgets were all hit, which was odd considering most gadget decks only ran 2 of each anyways. But the attack on 1-for-1 proactive removal like Smash and Ground and Fissure was surely because of gadgets anyways. There was a clear corporate fear of these mechanical monsters, and Breaker coming off would see immediate play considering he's an arguably better version of Snipe Hunter. The September list forced players to adapt to a new environment that will shape up in only a few events. There are 2 things pre-September that we'll have to cover. The first of which is the core set Tactical Evolution released on August 15th. This set introduced the first new monster ability since Unions, which was in 2003. Gemini monsters would be the new ability, and their gimmick is that you can normal summon the monster after it's already on the field to have the monster gain an effect. So imagine tribute summoning, but you're using the same monster just with an added perk. You also saw a new rarity in this set with its cover card, Rainbow Dragon in Ghost Rare. This new rarity has the art using less color, a more holographic effect, all of which makes the card appear to have a ghost-like appearance. Like Secret Rare or Ultimate Rare, Ghost Rare became one of the more highly sought after rarities in the TCG. What Tactical Evolution was really known for was 2 particular cards, Illblood and Zombie Master. Illblood is a Gemini monster that once it's Gemini summoned, lets you once per turn special summon a zombie monster from your hand or either player's graveyard. The downside is that when he's destroyed, all monsters summoned by his effect go along with him. Zombie Master is rather similar in which, also once per turn, you can send 1 monster from your hand to the grave to special summon 1 level 4 or lower zombie from any grave. These 2 zombie monsters greatly increase special summoning potential for zombie decks. And what card was fueled by special summoning? Card of Safe Return. Yes, this card finally makes its meta debut after its release back in early 2003's Labyrinth of Nightmare. Weird to think that a card that lets you draw a card every time a monster is special summoned from your grave took this long to see meta play, especially comparing to the meta of the last 10 years and the essential essence of grave play. Cards throughout this new iteration of zombies comboed with the entire deck. First place at SJC Durham, Philip Anthony would show the plethora of revival cards like Blood, Master, Call, Prima, and Book of Life. There is an abundance of cards to use with Safe Return to gain you card advantage. Gemini summoning since hasn't really seen any meta play, but back then, Blood worked because you were special summoning so often, you didn't mind to use your normal summon for a Gemini. This is why Hammer Shot was run quite often to counter Blood. Card Trooper and Snipe Hunter allowed you to fill the grave with cards for future plays too. In fact, at the first SJC of the format at Washington DC, the ruling was that you could use Master's effect without having a proper target in the grave, meaning you could discard a zombie and then revive it in the same effect. What's the deal? Going back to Tactical Evolution real quick, there were other decent cards introduced. Summoner's Art, Ritual Raven, Double Summon, Necrogarna, and Snake Rain. At the same time, we also saw another failed Chaos-like gimmick in Frost and Flame Dragon. While the art does look enticing, banishing 1 fire and 2 water for a monster with a basic discarding for destruction effect was asking for way too much. Seriously, they could have had made it where you banish 1 fire and 1 water and not discard for its effect. Simple. It feels as if Konami wanted to bring back the legacy of its light and dark thematic, but were too scared to give them any breathing room. First Sky Scourge, then Frost and Flame Dragon, give me a break. The only other card I want to mention is Gravitic Orb, which could have been neat in older DM formats. The set would get a special edition almost a month later featuring a DM era card from the anime, Mass Beast Desgardius. Pretty cool. The other pre-September release was the SJC prize card Gold Sarcophagus. While not as inherently busted as the previous prize card Crush Card Virus, this spell could grab you any card from your deck in just a couple turns. Select any power card like Heavy Storm, Stratos, or even Crush Card Virus if you're lucky enough to have a copy. It was an improved version of Different Dimension Capsule because it didn't need to stay on the field to resolve its effect. There is an argument whether or not to use Gold Sarc and CCV in modern play, since not everyone would have access to these 2 SJC prize cards. From what I've seen, people have been using them, but I'll leave playing them up to you to determine. Moving on to the first event, which I mentioned was in SJC DC. These inaugural events make players adapt to the fresh list and showcases where the game can continue on from, whether in decks that lose steam as the months pass by, or stay true to a proper meta call. At DC, we would see quite the variety: Cyber, DDT, Gadget, Zombie, but the 2 top decks would make the most impact. Starting with second place, we have Yugioh GX Comic Odyssey Burn, or CO Burn for short. Team Comic Odyssey was a dominant Yu-Gi-Oh group of duelists with multiple event tops. Their iteration of Burn would become unique among Burn decks, for it really was a control deck more than Burn. Its ability to stop the opponent and subsequently inflict burn damage was a scary strategy. Run more counters than your opponent had outs was the name of the game. More so when the smokescreen strategy was a viable game 2 and 3 options. It challenged the opponent's ability to adapt when they were never sure whether to side against Burn or Monarch or OTK. Opponents would even try to run Spiritualism to counter CO Burn and their plethora of counters like Solemn Judgment, Judgment of Anubis, or the soon-to-be released Dark Bribe. Louis Raimondo at the following event in Chicago would pilot almost a carbon copy of this deck straight to first place, certainly making use of the side deck as part of his game plan. What would top SJC DC would be a Perfect Circle Monarch deck. This deck was around during Trooper format, and yet with the newly implemented list, Perfect Circle would see a true emergence to power. Jonathan LaBounty would be the first duelist to adapt to the list, since the engines of both Monarchs and Destiny heroes were still consistent. His biggest innovation here was Phoenix Wing Windblast, which paired nicely with Ryza, the Storm Monarch, to control what your opponent drew and lock them out of live draws. Some duelists even ran back to square one as additional draw denial. Plus, Windblast would make you discard a card for cost, so you could use this in the standby phase to send and revive a Treeborn Frog to use for Ryza the same turn. All these cards could spin powerful continuous cards like Skill Drain, Wave Motion Cannon, and Card a Safe Return. Look, there's a reason the format is named after this deck, and LaBounty was the catalyst for it. Mid-September, we would get another powerful video game promo card. In Yugioh GX Tag Force 2, Dark Bribe would be released. Aw yeah. It acts as a pseudo-Solemn Judgment, except it doesn't negate monster summons, and instead of paying half your life points, your opponent draws one card. In some ways, Bribe is better or worse than Solemn depending on how you look at it. Either way, it makes for another powerful counter trap to stop opponents' plays. At the end of the month would be SJC Chicago, in which the aforementioned Louis Raimondo would incorporate Bribe in his first place deck. Other decks would include a traditional Monarch deck and Donald Myers, interesting deck. Top decks called as Cyber, however, I would call it Cyber Samurai, given that both Cyber Dragon and Sasuke Samurai number 4 both have a heavy presence. The Flying Kamakiri could float into Samurai, meaning honestly it's more of a wind deck than Cyber Dragon. Or maybe it's a Warrior Good stuff. I don't know, I'll just call it a what the fuck deck and move on. October 8th would be a treat as it saw a new side set, Premium Pack. Similar to the classic OCG set, this one would feature some fun rituals not yet seen in the TCG. Javelin Beetle, Zero the Mant, and Magician of Black Chaos, finally. It also had the EU debut of Metalmorph and Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon. Not to forget the new cards, Shield Crush and Legacy of Yata-Garasu, both of which were hype cards for Crush could counter defensive walls, and Yata was another draw trap like Jar of Greed. But the most notable card here had to be Marshmallow, as it acted as another stall monster like Spirit Reaper. Not only could it potentially inflict burn damage, but it also wasn't immediately destroyed if targeted. The downside being compared to Reaper is that it does not have a hand destruction effect or the most desirable dark attribute. Hey, I'm just happy we finally got more classic dual monster cards, and one of my favorite cards for that matter in Zero the Mant. Following would be SJC Durham, where aside from the topping zombie deck, Perfect Circle would make another showcase, just now in a format with a better understanding of the card pool. John Jensen would pull no punches with a clearly expensive deck featuring both recent prize cards. While not much different than the Bounties list, it would solidify Perfect Circle as a top tier deck moving forward. Durham would also see a fun deck in Perfect World, demonstrating that Dark Worlds were not out of the picture quite yet, even if the deck didn't make top cut. Nicholas Palermo with CO Burn used UFO Turtle and Cyber Phoenix to easily flow into card advantage. I never would have thought UFO Turtle would see meta play. Before the last event, there was a solid amount of releases, first of which was a new structure deck, Rise of the Dragon Lords. Of the deck, 3 specific cards are worth talking about. Malevolent Catastrophe was like a trap version of Heavy Storm that was used as a counter to CO Burn. Trade-in would let you discard a level 8 monster to draw 2 cards. At this point, it was an excellent addition for Demise OTK. And of course, Foolish Burial, which sends a monster straight from the deck to the grave. Foolish could turbo out your combos way faster than a Snipe Hunter or Card Trooper could, because you can increase the speed of graveyard play by immediately sending cards like Malicious, Disc Commander, or Treeborn Frog on command. The card would only gain power as the game would go on, with increasing attention on the graveyard, a soon-to-become virtual deck. After that would be a real bomb drop of a new boss monster. As a promotional card in Yugioh GX Volume 1 on the 6th of November, the game was introduced to a monster from the manga, Light and Darkness Dragon, or LAD for short. Also released in the Light and Darkness Power Pack around the same time, LAD is both a light and dark attribute that can only be tribute summoned. Its effect is 2 parts. One is that whenever a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated, LAD negates it and LAD then loses 500 attack and defense. If LAD's destroyed, then you destroy all cards you control and special summon 1 monster from the graveyard. Yeah, it is quite the multi-layered effect for a boss monster that's actually meta viable, a direction Yu-Gi-Oh would continue to travel down. It is a walking negation machine that can revive great cards upon destruction like Disc Commander. While it is true that it negates your own effects too, it was worth it for the plays you could make from it or stopping your opponent thereof. Remember, because its effect is a mandatory reaction, it is only affecting Chain Link 1, meaning Chain Conscious plays were in effect. Use quick play spells or counter traps wisely. We'll get to this card's deck incorporation in a little bit, so sit tight. The final major release of the format was another core set, Gladiators Assault, mid-November. While it was mostly a support set, it did introduce Cloudian and Gladiator Beast archetypes. It also introduced the sub-archetype Evil Hero. Big cards in the set include Swing of Memories for Demise OTK and Soul Taker for generic monster removal and its secondary effect, which could make cards miss timing. The Light and Shadow Imprisoning Mirrors would be great traps too. And you can't mention Tactical Evolution and Gladiators Assault without mentioning the infamous Ghost Rare misprints. There are other acceptable cards and cards that would take some time before making an impact, like Gladiator Beast, rounding off the last set of 2007 as an okay set on release. And with the card pull set, we have the final event of the year at SJC San Mateo. Aside from some fun decks like an anti-meta gadget deck and a 6 samurai deck with recent support, the event had a solid representation of what Perfect Circle format was all about. Yugioh Adem returns with Macro Monarch, an anti-meta floodgate deck. Because of its banishing capabilities, this deck counters plenty of cards like Zombie Master, Disc Commander, and Treeborn Frog. DD Survivor was hard to get rid of, plus it made for a good beatdown strategy. Even DD Scout Plane could be summoned right away if searched with Gold Sark. Justin Trias introduced Baboon Burn, which GOAT players may notice its similar design to Panda Burn. It's important to note that Green Baboon at this point was not once per turn, so he could be special summoned multiple times. Much like CO Burn, this non-traditional deck used both burn and stalls to surprise with aggressive plays and card advantage. David Rodriguez had Demise OTK, which, while Megamorph was now limited, Swing of Memories and Trade-In made up for the lack of instant power. Swing could let you special summon a normal monster from your grave until the end phase, but since this was an OTK deck, that wasn't a problem. Not to mention, Trade-In could just dump strong monsters in a setup not unlike Destiny Draw. And for a little spice, Charlie Law had Volcanic Monarch, a deck using Monarchs, Volcanics, and Blaze Accelerator for a very unique and possibly underrated deck. Remember, Accelerator works alongside Soul Exchange and Wildfire. Now for the top two of SJC San Mateo. Both duelists played Perfect Circle, however, this would be a new iteration of it. Remember Light and Darkness Dragon? Of course you do. See, this monster paired nicely with the PC strategy. There was finally a monster worthy of replacing Zaborg. The deck also incorporated the new cards Foolish Burial and Marshmallow. This latter half of PC format's most prominent deck would be known as D Raida, for D in Destiny Heroes and Raida in Lad's OCG name, although D Raito would be more correct, but I digress. This is not to say the deck was tier 0, as plenty of other decks could hurt this, like Gadget, Burn, and Macro Monarch. Given where the format was at and how quickly it would end soon after, D Raida wasn't around for too long, yet it certainly made an everlasting impact on the perception of this late 07 era. So you can see what I mean when the format could be seen at the two bookend events, where one was pre and one post Lad. In a modern sense, you would play towards the end of the format as is. Of course, now with Time Wizard formats, this could mean any specific event for the sanctioned play, but again, I digress. Jerry Wong would get second with his D Raida deck with a Spicy Spice in Destiny Hero Plasma. This big guy could use 3 Scapegoat tokens or 3 of your opponent's Ojama tokens they put on your field to summon himself, where he could absorb a monster, gain half their attack, and negate effects of enemy monsters on the field. You could say he's like an upgraded Thousand Eyes Restrict. Plasma was another boss monster revolving around negation to play. Despite Janjo coming back to 2, it clearly was the passing of the torch for one era of boss monsters, so to speak. First place would go to a familiar name, Philly Luna, also with D Raida. Negation, draw control, draw engines, yeah, this deck had it all to win a SJC. The final release would be in early December with the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship 2008 video game promo card, Dimensional Prison. This trap is a better version of Sakuretsu armor, where it banishes the attacking monster. Also, shout out to another of the promo cards, Deep Diver. Like, it's just a dude scuba diving. Fantastic. This is not to say that San Mateo was the final event of the format. Year, yes, However, the format would continue to one more event at the end of January in 2008, located in Orlando. This SJC would be one to note considering it had two policy changes. One was that note-taking was now allowed. This improved hand viewing cards like Trap Dust Shoot, although some duelists believe this would flatten the skill curve between advanced and third-rate duelists. At least you can't use the same notes in multiple games or use notes as means to delay play. However, with this, you spent less time memorizing cards and thus quicker games. There's also the final cut added, which meant your opponent had the final shuffle or deck cut opportunity every time you shuffled your deck. This was to ensure the deck shuffle was never manipulated in any way. When it comes to tops, Cedric Sequeira would top with what else but D-Rida, another top that would solidify the format's namesake. He had to get past plenty of expert duelists, and even some decks you may not have expected like Alvaro Gerard's Volcanic Monarch, another showcase of an underrated deck. And top 4 Matthew Tuxford and his anti-meta gadgets that did not hesitate to use the recently released Dimensional Prison. All in all, SJ Orlando was a fitting way to end Perfect Circle format. Speaking of modern play, there's quite a lot we can look at. I've mentioned that people have been playing with Gold Sarc and Crush cards, so keep that in mind. We have Kesha with the Perfect Circle D-Rida deck, which uses most of the important historical cards like Windblast, Pulling the Rug, and Foolish Burial. Mr. Fahrenheit used gadgets to their fullest potential with quite the hefty deck with plenty of back row cards and monsters to generate advantage like Hydrogeddon. Using the Limited Fissure as another 1-for-1 removal is funny when you think it could be considered a meta-relevant card in 2007. Les Wend Fox, I'm sure I pronounced that horribly, played Macro Monarchs, which is another anti-meta deck. And then there's U-Lord playing Ocean Control, which is the return of the Big City deck from Trooper format, a deck I've covered in said format's video. Perfect Circle may be an apt name, not for the deck, rather that the format itself was complex without being too boring or too intricate, a just right bowl of porridge. Popular decks were Perfect Circle, or D-Rida depending on which event you play, Baboon Burn, Comic Odyssey Burn, Gadget, Safe Return Zombies, Diamond Dude Turbo, Demise OTK, and other Monarch variations and Warrior good stuff. Since there were less OTK decks than before, this meant that duelists had more player interaction, which is healthy for the game. It is not far off to say this is the GOAT format of the GX era, given its deep card pool and meta. While yes, it is for debate whether some cards should be played, and the format really was split between two parts, not unlike some other formats like Android, the format is still enjoyable no matter what point in time you played. Yu-Gi-Oh! So far in the timeline saw the end of chaos dominant decks, and while Monarchs stayed on top for a long time now, new boss monsters started to emerge by the end of the year. It really was a transition year from staple good stuff to more archetypal oriented decks, even if at a more engine level as seen with Destiny Heroes and otherwise. In that regard, the last gap of retro Yu-Gi-Oh! Perhaps? From start to end, aside from Airblade Turbo, 2007 was an excellent year for Yu-Gi-Oh! Both Trooper and Perfect Circle formats had their share of variety without anything being too degenerate in the form of OTKs, alt win conditions, or tier 0 decks. With a clear age of new power cards emerging like Card Trooper, Ryza, Foolish Burial, and Light and Darkness Dragon, are these only signs of bigger things to come? And if bigger things do come, what are the chances that the next big thing is armed?